This is March 3rd of 2015, and we are going to be looking at what I've got a red arrow pointing at, and that's hydrate. Hydrate is very, very important, and it's something that we're going to be doing in our lab, and it's something that will just be a natural extension of what we've been doing with naming molecules, and you're going to see how this works when we're talking about a hydrate. But first you have to know all of these prefixes. So be sure you look this up in your textbook and find out what they are. They're in chapter 11. Let's see what that is. 11.5 in the textbook. So let's get started. This is ammonium, and the ammonium ion and the chromate ions, their charges are such that we have to have two ammonias for every chromate so that we get two pluses to offset the two minuses and make 0. So we call this ammonium chromate, and then there's an imaginary one here, which means that this is a monohydrate. So the full name would be ammonium chromate monohydrate. Now as we go to our next molecule, we're going to see chromate and copper and sulfate. And so let's look at those ions. The copper has a 2 plus and the sulfate has a 2 minus. Now the only one that we know for sure when we start is this guy. So we've got to offset a 2 minus with only one copper. So that copper has to carry all of the charge to make this a total of 0. So we're going to have, not only is this a 2, but because we don't know what copper is, we have to state that when we name it. So here it is, copper 2, that's a Roman numeral 2, sulfate pentahydrate. And let's see how that's written. Now this sodium can only have one charge, so when we're naming this molecule, there's no problem like we had back here. And so this would just be sodium acetate, and let's look at their charges. As you can see, they're a 1 plus and a 1 minus, and this 1 plus is because it's in column 1 of the periodic chart, what we call the alkaline metals. And acetate is just a polyatomic ion that you've memorized, hopefully. So let's name this guy sodium acetate trihydrate. And so the trihydrate would be 3, and the prefix here is tri. So for the same reason, this guy was 5, and so penta went along with the copper sulfate, or the copper 2 sulfate. All right, so let's move on. Now cobalt is another one of those guys. He's a transition element. You see all of these guys, copper, cobalt, iron, they're all in the transition elements. And because they're at transition elements, we never know for sure what their charges are, so we always have to state it in the name. So let's look at the numbers here for cobalt chloride. So how do we know that cobalt is a 2 plus? Because chlorides are 1 minus, and there's 2 of them. So we have to have a 2 negative charge for chlorides, which requires that we have a 2 positive charge for the single cobalt. So we're going to name this cobalt 2 chloride, 2 because his charge is 2, and then the hexahydrate, cobalt 2 chloride hexahydrate, or 6 waters. Next, we go to this guy, and we're going to now look at his ions. And you see the ions for iron have to be 3. And the reason for that is we have nitrate is a -1, but there are 3 of them for 3 total negatives. And so the 3 pluses offset the 3 minuses. And so we're going to call this iron 3, Roman numeral 3, nitrate, and this will be a monohydrate. And when we write that, it's going to look like. So you can see that Roman numeral 3, and that tells us that the charge on the iron is 3. Okay, so we're ready to move on, and let's get rid of this. And now iron with phosphate, you have this situation. Iron is a 3+, and it has to be a 3+ because there's only one of him, and the phosphate ion from your memorized ions we know is a 3-. So the 3+ has to offset the 3- to give us 0, and we're ready to go. This one is iron 3, and the only difference between the name of this guy, so far as the iron is concerned, and this guy is that we've got one only, and this guy was offset by 3 molecules, or 3 ions, and this is only offset by only 1 ion, but it's a 3-. So this will be written iron, Roman numeral 3, phosphate, and that'll be a 4, so 4 is tetra, so it's iron 3 phosphate tetrahydrate. All right, let's move on. And our next one is sodium carbonate, 10. 10 is deca, so sodium carbonate decahydrate. And you can see the, at least I hope we can see it in just a second. So we have sodium as a 1+, he's always a 1+, and your carbonate is over here, and that's a 2- from our memorized ions. This is because he's in column 1, just as we had with this guy. And away we go. We can call this sodium carbonate decahydrate. And down here, let's clear that out. Down here we have calcium chloride, and we don't have to put in any of those funny names with the Roman numerals or anything, because calcium is always a 2+, and again down here sodium will also be a 2+. So let's just name these off and be done with it. Calcium chloride dihydrate, sodium sulfate trihydrate. Now what I'd like you to do is go back to the beginning of the video, stop the video right at the very beginning, and see if you can name these guys without looking at your notes. That's it. I hope this makes hydrates a little easier for you to understand how to name.